It was a great party, but 1 year on, I am not sure who the father of my child is.
Dive into Lily's whirlwind life after a wild party changes everything. Caught in a tantalizing tale of passion, mystery, and heartache, Lily's journey to find her child's father unravels secrets and tests her strength. Can she face the truth and the consequences it brings? A wild month and a wilder party, and now I am pregnant. But who is the father? Opens with Lily recounting the unforgettable night that turned her life upside down. Amidst the glitter and allure of a lavish party, she finds herself in a passionate encounter that leads to an unexpected pregnancy. But with two potential fathers, who could it be? Chapter 1. A wild month and a wilder party, and now I am pregnant, but who is the father?
It was one of those nights, you know, the kind where the stars seem to twinkle with a bit of extra mischief, and the moon hangs low, whispering secrets to anyone daring enough to listen. That's how it started, at least in my mind, as I stand here, staring at the little plus sign on the pregnancy test. It's funny how life can change in just a blink, how a single night can rewrite your entire story. Let's rewind to a month ago. It was March, a time when winter's chill starts to ease its grip and life feels a bit more hopeful. I was at my friend James's place. He's the sort who could throw a party in an empty room and still make it the talk of the town. It was his 30th birthday bash, and true to form, James had outdone himself. His apartment was decked out like some kind of Gatsby-esque fantasy, all shimmer and sparkle. I remember thinking it was a bit over the top, but then, that's James for you. I wasn't in the mood for a party, to be honest. Work had been a drag, and my love life was, well, let's just say it was as barren as a desert. But there I was, dolled up in a dress that was a tad too tight, sipping on some fancy cocktail whose name I couldn't even pronounce, and trying my best to look like I belonged in that sea of glam and glitz. Then he walked in. Alex. I hadn't seen him before, which was odd, considering James's circle was pretty tight-knit. He was the kind of handsome that makes you do a double take, tall, with dark, brooding eyes, and a smile that seemed to hold a world of secrets. We got to talking, and before I knew it, the evening had slipped away into a blur of laughter and whispered confessions. The party swirled around us, a whirlwind of music and dancing bodies, but it all faded into the background. It was like we were the only two people in the world. Alex had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the most interesting person he'd ever met. It was intoxicating. And then there was James. My James. Not in the romantic sense, mind you. We'd been friends since uni, so close that sometimes I wondered if we knew each other too well. He was always there, the steady hand in my often chaotic life. That night, he was the perfect host, charming and attentive, but every so often, our eyes would meet across the room, and something unspoken would pass between us. A question, maybe, or a possibility we'd both been too afraid to explore. As the night wore on, the party shifted from wild to something softer, more intimate. People started to drift away, leaving just a handful of us, the diehards, the ones who weren't ready to let go of the magic just yet. We ended up on the rooftop. The city lights sprawled out beneath us like a glittering ocean. I don't remember how it happened, the shift from laughter to silence, from friends to something else. But suddenly, there I was, caught between Alex's magnetic pull and the comfortable familiarity of James. It was a moment suspended in time, a choice hovering in the air like a dare. And then the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. It was beautiful, but with its light came the return of reality. The party was over. The magic dissolved. Fast forward to now, a month later, and here I am, holding this little stick that's just upended my world. Pregnant. Me. I can't help but laugh. It's either that or cry, and I'm not much of a crier. But who's the father? Is it Alex, with his enigmatic charm, or James, who's been my rock for so many years? I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, and the ground is crumbling beneath my feet. There's no going back, only forward into the unknown. And the craziest part of me is excited, terrified but excited, because this is the start of a story, my story, and I'm the one who gets to write it. So, I guess that's where we begin, huh? With a party, a night of unbridled passion, and a question that's going to change my life. Who is the father of my child? Stick around, and we'll find out together. To be continued. This is chapter 1 of a 6-part short story. If you don't have time to watch or listen to all 6 chapters right now, why not subscribe to the Romance Diaries on YouTube and check back later, or simply stay tuned for chapter 2.
In I'm a Single Mother and I Don't Know Who the Father Is, explore Lily's emotional roller coaster as a new mother. Struggling with the joys and challenges of single parenthood, she grapples with the looming question of her baby's paternity. As she juggles motherhood and work, will Lily find the courage to seek the truth? Chapter 2. I'm a Single Mother and I Don't Know Who the Father Is.
You know how they say life never gives you more than you can handle? I used to believe that, but here I am, rocking my 6-month-old baby, Sam, in the dead of night, thinking maybe, just maybe, life overestimates me sometimes. Sam's adorable, with these big, curious eyes that seem to soak in every little detail of the world around him. He's got this tuft of hair that sticks up no matter how much I try to tame it, and when he giggles, it's like the sun breaking through the clouds on a dreary day. He's my miracle, my little bundle of joy and chaos. But as much as I love him, I can't help but feel like I'm drowning sometimes. Single motherhood wasn't exactly on my life's to-do list. I mean, I always thought I'd have kids, but I pictured a partner by my side, you know? Someone to share the sleepless nights and the endless diapers, the first steps and the first words. Instead, it's just me, trying to juggle work and baby and a million other things, running on coffee and sheer willpower. And then there's the question that haunts me. Who is Sam's father? Is it James, my best friend who's always been just a friend, until maybe he wasn't? Or Alex, the man who walked into that party and turned my world upside down? I haven't seen Alex since that night. He's like a ghost, a memory that lingers in the back of my mind, a what-if that never had the chance to become something more. James, on the other hand, is still very much present. He's been amazing, honestly. He's there whenever I need him, dropping by with groceries or just to hold Sam so I can have a moment to myself. He never talks about that night, about what might have happened between us. It's this unspoken thing, hanging in the air like a cloud ready to burst. Sometimes when I watch him with Sam, I see a tenderness in his eyes that makes my heart do this funny little skip. And I can't help but wonder, what if? What if James is the father? What if he wants more than just friendship? But then the fear creeps in, fear of ruining what we have, fear of the truth and all its messy consequences. My mum says I should get a paternity test, settle the matter once and for all. But it's not that simple. Knowing the truth means facing it, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. What if it changes everything? What if it changes nothing? I remember when I was pregnant, feeling Sam kick for the first time, like a tiny flutter in my belly. It was magical, this little life growing inside me. But it was also terrifying, because with every kick, with every day that passed, I knew I was getting closer to a future I couldn't predict, a future where I'd be responsible for this tiny, perfect human being. And now he's here, in my arms, his little chest rising and falling with each breath. He depends on me for everything, and that's both beautiful and overwhelming. I want to give him the world, but some days I feel like I'm struggling just to stay afloat. The worst part is the loneliness. It creeps up on you, you know? In the quiet moments, when Sam's finally asleep and the house is just silent. That's when the doubts come, the what-ifs and the should-haves. That's when I miss having someone to share it all with, someone to lean on when it all gets too heavy. I keep telling myself I'm strong enough to do this on my own, that I don't need anyone. But some nights, when the darkness feels too heavy, I can't help but wish for a hand to hold, a voice to tell me it's going to be okay. So here I am, a single mother with a heart full of love and a head full of questions. I look down at Sam, his little fingers curled around mine, and I know I'd do it all over again for him. But I also know that sooner or later I'm going to have to face the truth about his father, and that's a storm I'm not sure I'm ready for. To be continued. This is chapter 2 of a 6-part short story. If you are enjoying this story, please show us some love by hitting the like button. Please stay tuned for chapter 3.
Confronting my wild past. The search for my son's father begins, sees Lily embarking on a quest to uncover her child's paternity. Haunted by memories of a wild party, she must confront her past, facing both the charming Alex and her steadfast friend James. What truths will her journey reveal? Chapter 3. Confronting my wild past. The search for my son's father begins.
You know how they say that the past has a way of catching up with you? Well, mine was sprinting, and I was just about out of breath. Staring at Sam, his little face so innocent and unaware, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. The search for his father, for my own peace of mind, it had to begin. I'd spent the last few months in a haze of baby routines, work and restless thoughts. I kept turning over that night, the party, in my mind. It was like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. And the biggest piece, the identity of Sam's father, was the most elusive of all. I decided to start with Alex. I hadn't seen him since the party, and tracking him down felt like trying to catch a shadow. He didn't seem to have any social media presence, and James, well, he clammed up whenever I mentioned Alex's name. It was almost as if he was hiding something, but that couldn't be, right? James, my rock, keeping secrets from me. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. So, I did what any desperate, slightly overwhelmed single mother would do. I turned detective. It started with a few casual questions here and there, a bit of online sleuthing, and some carefully crafted conversations with mutual acquaintances from the party. It was like trying to piece together a picture from a handful of puzzle pieces, each more baffling than the last. And then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, as I was feeding Sam his mashed peas, which he seemed to find more amusing to spit out than eat, I got a lead. A mutual friend mentioned Alex's frequent visits to a local cafe. It wasn't much, but it was something. I must admit, the thought of seeing Alex again sent a flurry of butterflies through my stomach. What would I say? How would I feel? The memories of our brief, intense connection were like embers, long dormant but still glowing. The cafe was one of those bohemian places, with mismatched chairs and a constant hum of conversation. I found him there on a Tuesday, nestled in a corner, his eyes glued to a laptop screen. Seeing him again was like stepping back in time. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment there was a flicker of recognition, then surprise. "Alex?" My voice was steadier than I felt. "Lily." He blinked, and then that slow, charming smile I remembered so well spread across his face. "It's been a while." We talked, or rather, I talked, and he listened. I told him about Sam, about my fears and doubts. He was quiet for a long time after I'd finished, his eyes searching my face as if looking for something he'd lost. "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice low. "Lily, if he's mine, I want to be a part of his life." His words hit me like a wave. Relief, fear, hope. A tangle of emotions I couldn't quite unravel. But as much as I wanted to believe him, to throw myself into the possibility of a little family, doubt lingered. What if he wasn't the father? What if he was? I left the cafe with more questions than answers, my heart a jumbled mess. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to talk to James. He'd been too quiet, too evasive. It was time for some honest conversation. James agreed to meet me at the park the next day, a neutral space where Sam could play while we talked. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves a riot of gold and red. It was beautiful, in a melancholic sort of way. "James," I began, as Sam toddled on the grass, blissfully unaware of the gravity of our conversation. "We need to talk about that night, the party." James looked at me, his expression guarded. "Lily, I don't know if that's a good idea." But I pressed on, the words tumbling out. I told him about my conversation with Alex, about my uncertainty and fear. And then I waited, my heart pounding, as James took a deep breath. "Lily, there's something you should know." And that's when it happened. A shriek from Sam, a sudden sharp cry of pain. We both turned, our conversation forgotten, as our world narrowed down to the tiny figure on the grass, his face scrunched up in distress. James was there before me, scooping Sam into his arms, his face etched with concern. And in that moment, watching them together, a new question began to form in my mind. A possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider. As I took Sam from James, comforting him, I knew that our conversation was far from over. But it would have to wait. Right now, my son needed me. The truth about that night, about Sam's father, it was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. But as I looked into James's eyes, I realized that maybe, just maybe, the answer had been in front of me all along. To be continued. This is Chapter 3 of a 6-part short story. If you would like to experience your own real-life romance, possibly not exactly like this one, please visit our sponsors in the description below. Stay tuned for Chapter 4.
My God, one of these two idiots is the father of my child, thrusts Lily into a whirlwind of emotions. As she navigates through a web of secrets and revelations about Alex and James, the potential fathers of her child, Lily's world is turned upside down. Will she find the answer she seeks, or will the truth be too much to handle? Chapter 4. My God, one of these two idiots is the father of my child.
There are moments in life when you just have to stop and ask yourself, how did I get here? I had one of those moments, sitting on my sofa, a half-eaten slice of pizza in one hand, a sleeping Sam in the other, and a mind swirling with a storm of thoughts. The pizza was cold, but my thoughts were anything but. After the incident at the park with James, things had gotten even more complicated, if that was even possible. I had set out to find answers, but all I seemed to find were more questions. And now, staring at the ceiling, I realized that the answer to one of the most important questions of my life lay with one of two men who couldn't be more different if they tried. There was James, my constant, my rock, the man who'd been there for me through thick and thin. But there was something about him, something he wasn't telling me. I could see it in his eyes, the way they darted away whenever we got too close to talking about that night. It was like he was hiding a part of himself, a part he was scared to show. And then there was Alex. Enigmatic, elusive Alex. He had appeared out of nowhere and turned my world upside down. Our conversation at the cafe had been a revelation, but it had also left me with a gnawing sense of uncertainty. He seemed sincere, but there was a part of me that couldn't help but doubt. Could I really trust a man I barely knew, a man who had disappeared as quickly as he had appeared? As I lay there with Sam's gentle breathing a steady rhythm in the quiet room, I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, caught between the past and the future. I needed to know who Sam's father was, not just for my sake, but for his too. The next day I took a deep breath and made the call I'd been dreading. I arranged for a paternity test. It was time to face the truth, whatever it might be. James agreed to take the test without hesitation. His voice was steady over the phone, but I could sense the unspoken tension. This test could change everything between us, and we both knew it. Arranging the test with Alex was more complicated. He was harder to reach, always on the move, but eventually he agreed. There was a wariness in his voice, a guarded tone that hadn't been there before. The days leading up to the test were some of the longest of my life. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, one wrong step away from tumbling into an abyss of uncertainty. Work was a blur, and taking care of Sam, though it brought me joy, couldn't distract me from the nagging thoughts that haunted my every moment. Finally, the day of the test arrived. I met James first. We went to the clinic together, a strange sort of solidarity between us. He held my hand as we walked in, his grip tight, as if he was trying to hold us both together. The look in his eyes was one I couldn't quite decipher: fear, hope, regret. It was all there, a tumultuous sea behind his calm exterior. Then it was Alex's turn. He met me at the clinic later that day, his demeanour cool and composed. But even he couldn't hide the flicker of emotion that crossed his face as he saw Sam, his potential son, for the first time. There was a moment, brief and fleeting, where our eyes met, and I saw a glimpse of something raw and unguarded. The tests were done, the swabs taken, and all that was left was to wait. The wait was excruciating, each day stretching out like a lifetime. I found myself watching Sam, studying his features, trying to find traces of James or Alex in his face. But he was his own person, a beautiful, unique blend that defied easy categorization. And then, one ordinary Thursday, with the sun shining and the birds singing like it was just another day, the results came in. I stared at the envelope in my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. The answer to the question that had been haunting me was right there, just a tear of paper away. But as I stood there, about to open the envelope, I hesitated. A part of me was scared, terrified of what I would find. What if knowing the truth changed everything? What if it changed nothing? I took a deep breath, steadied my shaking hands, and opened the envelope. The paper inside was crisp and official, the words typed in neat, emotionless rows. My eyes scanned the lines, searching for the answer. And then, there it was. The name of Sam's father, a name that brought with it a flood of emotions, a torrent of memories and possibilities. But just as I was processing the revelation, my phone rang. It was James. His voice was urgent, panicked. "Lily, you need to come over. Now, it's urgent." My heart skipped a beat. What now? What else could possibly happen? As I rushed out the door, the test results clutched in my hand. I knew one thing for certain. My life was about to change, all over again. To be continued. This is Chapter 4 of a 6-part short story. We would love to know what you think of the story, so please let us have your comments and feedback. Stay tuned for Chapter 5.
In Sometimes It Is Better Not to Know Who Is the Father of Your Child, Lily faces the daunting possibility that some truths are better left undiscovered. Torn between the need to know her child's father and the fear of what that knowledge could bring, she stands at a crossroads. What choice will she make? Chapter 5. Sometimes it is better not to know who is the father of your child.
Life, I've learned, is a mosaic of moments. Some you wish you could relive forever. Others you'd give anything to forget. As I rushed to James' house, the test results burning a hole in my pocket, I couldn't help but wonder which kind of moment I was hurtling towards. James's voice had been a mix of urgency and fear, a combination I'd never heard from him before. It set my nerves on edge, my mind racing with possibilities. Was he hurt? Had something happened? I arrived at his house, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was ajar, unusual for James, who was meticulous about security. Pushing it open, I called out his name, my voice echoing through the quiet house. "Lily!" His voice came from the living room, strained and barely above a whisper. I found him there, sitting on the couch, his face pale, his eyes haunted. Something about his appearance made my stomach twist with apprehension. He looked up as I entered, his gaze locking onto mine. "Lily, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice trembling. I sat down beside him, my mind racing. Was this about the paternity test? About that night at the party? About us? He took a deep breath, and then the words came, spilling out in a torrent of confession and revelation. He talked about the party, about the choices he'd made, choices that had seemed inconsequential at the time but now loomed large between us. As I listened, a sense of betrayal began to seep into my heart. James, my rock, my constant, had kept secrets from me. Secrets that changed everything. And then he mentioned Alex. My mind flashed back to the cafe, to Alex's words, his promise to be a part of Sam's life if he was the father. But James's revelations cast those moments in a new, stark light. I felt like I was in a freefall, the ground slipping away beneath me. The man I'd trusted more than anyone in the world had deceived me. And for what? Fear, protection, love? He reached out, his hand hovering over mine, but I pulled away, a reflexive reaction to the storm of emotions inside me. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what all of this meant for me, for Sam. The paternity test results lay forgotten in my pocket, their significance dwarfed by the revelations that had just shattered the quiet of James's living room. In that moment, I realized that knowing who Sam's father was didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the web of lies and half-truths that had entangled us all. I stood up, my legs shaky, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. James looked up at me, his eyes pleading for understanding, for forgiveness. But I couldn't give him that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As I walked out of James's house, the cool air hit me like a splash of reality. I was alone, truly alone, in a way I'd never been before. The men I'd thought I could count on, the men who could have been Sam's father, were now just reminders of a past I couldn't return to, a past that had lost its shine. The drive home was a blur. I was on autopilot, my mind numb, my heart aching. When I got home, I scooped Sam up from his crib, his little body warm and trusting against mine. He was oblivious to the chaos of the adult world, his needs simple and pure. As I held him, his tiny hand gripping my finger, a realization began to dawn on me. Maybe it was better this way. Maybe not knowing who Sam's father was meant I could write our story on my own terms, without the shadows of the past looming over us. I looked down at the test results, still unopened in my hand. Did I really need to know? What would it change? Sam was mine, my son, my heart. He didn't need a label, a paternity test to define him. I tucked the envelope away in a drawer, unopened, its secrets locked away. Maybe one day I'd have the courage to face what was inside, but not today. Today, I had my son, and that was enough. As I rocked Sam back to sleep, a sense of peace settled over me. Life was messy, complicated, and often painful. But it was also beautiful, filled with moments of pure love and joy. Tomorrow, I'd wake up and face the world, just me and Sam, against whatever came our way. But tonight, I'd hold my son and cherish the simplicity of the moment. Sometimes it really is better not to know. To be continued. This is Chapter 5 of a 6-part short story. If you are enjoying this story, why not subscribe to the Romance Diaries, where you can enjoy other stories of love, romance, heartache, revenge, cheating and betrayal, and by clicking on the notification bell at the same time we can let you know every time we bring out a new video. Please stay tuned for the final chapter, Chapter 6.
The paternity test I wish we had never taken brings Lily to a pivotal moment. As she awaits the results that could change everything, a startling revelation and an urgent call from James lead to a decision that alters her course. Will this test bring closure or new turmoil? Chapter 6. The paternity test I wish we had never taken.
Life, I've come to understand, is a patchwork of moments stitched together, some so beautiful they take your breath away, others so painful they leave scars. As I sat in my dimly lit living room, Sam sleeping peacefully in his crib, I couldn't help but feel that I was on the verge of one of those deafening moments. The unopened paternity test result sat in my drawer, its presence like a silent question mark in the back of my mind. But in the wake of everything that had happened with James, and the unresolved feelings about Alex, I found myself hesitating. Did I really want to know? Could I handle the truth, whatever it might be? Days turned into weeks, and the envelope remained untouched. But the weight of it never left me. It was there in the quiet moments, a constant reminder of a past that refused to stay buried. James had tried to reach out, his messages a mix of apologies and pleas for understanding. But every time my phone buzzed with his name, I couldn't bring myself to respond. The hurt was too fresh, the betrayal too raw. And Alex, well, he was like a shadow, always on the periphery of my thoughts. I hadn't seen him since the day at the cafe, but his words lingered, a promise hanging in the air. Then one evening, as I was putting Sam to bed, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice unusually serious. "Lily, you need to come over. There's something we need to discuss." The urgency in her tone sent a shiver down my spine. I arranged for a neighbour to watch Sam and drove to my parents' house, my mind racing with possibilities. The house was quiet when I arrived, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. My mother was sitting in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a mixture of worry and determination. "Lily," she began, her voice steady, "there's something I need to tell you. About your father." My father. The man who had been nothing more than a vague memory, a photo in an old album. He had left when I was just a baby, and my mother had raised me alone. As she spoke, the pieces of my past began to fall into place, each revelation more shocking than the last. My father hadn't just left. He had been forced to leave, a victim of circumstances and choices that had spiraled out of control. I sat there, listening to my mother, and felt as if the ground was shifting beneath me. My own struggles, my own fears about Sam's paternity, suddenly took on a new perspective. I was living a cycle, a pattern that had started long before I was even born. By the time my mother finished, the room was spinning. I needed air, space to process everything she had told me. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked out into the cool night air. The stars were bright overhead, pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. I thought about Sam, asleep in his crib, so innocent and unaware of the complexities of the world he had been born into. I thought about James, about the pain and the love that had tangled us up in knots. And I thought about Alex, the man who might be Sam's father, the man who offered a future full of unknowns. And then I thought about the paternity test, still unopened, still waiting. I realised that I didn't need it anymore. The test could tell me who Sam's biological father was, but it couldn't tell me what kind of mother I would be, what kind of life I would provide for my son. I drove home, my decision made. I wasn't going to open the test results. I didn't need to. Sam was my son, and that was all that mattered. I would raise him with love, with strength, with the knowledge that he was wanted, cherished. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the soft sounds of Sam's breathing, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The journey ahead would be challenging, full of ups and downs, but I was ready for it. Life is a patchwork of moments, and I was determined to make each one count.